Good afternoon, and thank you all for joining us for today's webinar, Transport Programs, How to Find and Cultivate Successful Rescue Partnerships. Before we get started, I'd like to give a big thank you to Maddie's Fund for their continued support of our educational programs. Today's webinar is taught by transport expert Clare Callison, Canine Lifesaving Advisor for American Pets Alive, Maddie's Lifesaving Academy. Claire teaches the Systematic Canine Lifesaving Masterclass, Dog Matchmaker, and the Volunteer Dog Handling Apprenticeship for American Pets Alive. Please hold your questions till the end of the session and we'll have time for Q&A. Also, if you're interested in any of our other educational programs or finding out details about our upcoming conference, which is going to be here in Austin, February 28th through March 1st, please visit our website at www.americanpetsalive. And now I'm going to turn things over to Claire.
Alrighty, thanks everyone for joining us. Really excited to give this presentation to you all this evening. And again, we'll have time at the end to answer any questions that you have. And if we don't get to your questions, then we'll be sure to follow up after this webinar with you directly. So I'm the Maddie's Canine Lifesaving Advisor. And we're going to go through some basics of transport, but really what you guys are here for is rescue partnerships. So my background really comes from San Antonio and building a transport program essentially from scratch. No real guidebook and no real partners to work towards or to transport to. So a lot of this is based on my experience of, again, just from the ground up transport program building. And also in the last year, working through American Pets Alive with shelters all over the country and building their own rescue partnerships and their own transport programs. There's a lot of benefits to transport, obviously. So we're asking ourselves, why should we even transport? This will be relevant to both the source shelter as well as receiving shelters. Real obvious is the increasing of kennel capacity to save more lives. Oftentimes our intakes are outpacing our adoptions. Even though we've adopted proactive adoption programs, we're doing fosters, we're doing all these wonderful things. We've got local rescue partners, but it doesn't seem to be enough. Our kennels are packed every day and unfortunately making tough decisions on euthanasia based on lack of time or lack of space. So transporting has been a huge program that's been super beneficial to match southern shelters up with northern shelters all over the country to fill empty kennels and to save more lives. And really, when we're looking at the receiving shelter, we've got an adoption demand. So if a potential adopter comes into a shelter and they're looking for a medium-sized dog or a large-sized dog or even a small dog, and they only have a couple dogs to choose from, there's a really good chance that they're going to go somewhere else, possibly to buy or from a breeder or Craigslist. So we want to fulfill this demand to rescue, to adopt in our communities that don't have an overpopulation problem. We also have this sort of kind of epidemic. So shelters all over the country that if you have an open kennel, you know, this is a rare sight for many of us, but it should be sort of, yes, you get a moment of relief, a sigh, you get a little bit of a break, but also we should have this urgency always fueling us every day to fill the empty kennel, and always as an opportunity. And I see it as more of an obligation to save a life. So even though you might be coming from a no-kill, rescue humane society, your municipal shelter might be overflowing, or there's a shelter in a partnering state that also needs your help. So not just sitting back with open kennels, but having an urgency to save more lives, get those kennels filled so they can be matched up with their adopters. And then anytime that multiple partners or even two different organizations are bridging a partnership, anytime there is two partners working together, you're automatically going to have an increase of support, whether it be from your media wanting to pick up a press release of an exciting transport program, donors, funders start to be much more interested in you if you've got a partnership going on. Then you're also attracting, it's a new fun program for fosters to be a part of, temporary fosters, as well as for volunteers to also join in. So tons of benefits to not just one community, but to multiple communities. We're going to jump into a little bit of the transport coordinator's job, and we've got a couple transport coordinators. There's one, usually at the source shelter on the ground. And again, I want to preface, this could be a volunteer at your organization. It doesn't always have to be a paid position, or it can be a staff member at your organization. As you guys know, if you've been doing transport for a while, there's a lot of moving pieces, tons of logistics to kind of work through. So it's really helpful to have one point of contact for your organization that's overseeing the dog or cat's movement from everywhere from step one at the source shelter all the way on transport and then when they arrive. So when we look at the prep, the source shelter's work that they're doing, they're handling all the logistics throughout the dog or cat's journey. So this is a very oversimplified chart because if you've ever done transport, it's not just cut and dry, lots of things that can happen in between. But really the basic process, what we sort of identify as the main process, the animals at the shelter, the dog or cats at the shelter, they're identified as a possible transport candidate for transport. Then they're pitched to a partner. I call it pitching, or sending a group of dogs or cats to your partner for approval on transport. The rescue partner then approves. The dog or cat is vetted. Ideally, we'll move to foster. So I'm big proponent on moving the dogs and cats that are tagged for transport, moving them out of your shelter, out of what I call sort of germ central. You don't want them taking up a kennel space. Move them into a foster home while they await for transport. Then you're going to be doing your health certificate as close as possible to that transport, and then they're actually leaving on transport. So again, very oversimplified. Some of you all may be laughing because this seems really easy. We know that there's a lot of steps in this process, but having one point of contact, really overseeing the entire process, is crucial. And we'll get into that in a little bit onto why. The job is not done, when the transport leaves, the dog or cat then arrives to their destination. There's a lot of work that needs to be done, unloading all the animals, maybe doing medical workups on them, filling in the gaps of any medical needs that they might need, processing their intake, so getting them intaked into your system, into your shelter software, and then finding a kennel or a foster placement for them. So it could be that fosters are picking up right when they arrive. It could be that they're actually moving into your adoption center or into your shelter. So all of that takes a lot of coordination. Scanning microchips, making sure everyone looks healthy, getting them all in and settled. So usually this is kind of a high stress time for the dogs and cats coming off. So it's really good to have somebody that's their point person watching out for them, keeping eyes on the entire process. Then after that, a lot of times the transport coordinator, their job is not done. They're going to follow those dogs or cats through to adoption. Oftentimes some of their notes are going to be needed from the source shelter. And then ideally, they're going to be giving feedback post-transport to that source shelter. So you can see both of these people's job, no matter where they are, the source or the receiving, got a lot of moving parts and a lot of things in between. And of course, sort of both parties are in tune when the dogs or cats are in transit, then both of them are really sort of on call during that process in case anything is needed. All right, so choosing your transport coordinator. I love this photo of MacGyver because really they've got to be a jack of all trades and have to be really the definition of resourceful. So that's our number one. If you've done transport, you know this. You're not always going to have all the money you need, all the resources, all the staff, even all the supplies, kennels and admin supplies. So all of these things won't be just sort of handed to you. So you really need someone that can make sort of magic out of things that are just real basic. They've got to not require all the bells and whistles, but can be resourceful. So that's why we have MacGyver with the duct tape. I could fix that. Relentless. There's endless roadblocks. It's not easy. It's a huge task. Even if you're just transporting, a couple hours away from your shelter, there's a lot of moving parts with that. There are things that will happen, that they go awry, things don't go as planned, but you can't have somebody in that role that's just going to throw their hands up and say, I can't do this job anymore. This is too hard. But they have to be completely solution oriented. Problems are going to arise, but the response should always be, how can I fix that? How can I find a solution to that? And ideally, that's not going to cost a lot of money. Then they have to be proactive. So my biggest thing with transport programs is it's great to just sort of maintain a program, but we see the biggest impact when you've got somebody in this role that's really fueled every day to grow a transport program. So they're reaching out to new partners, You might have 3 partners that you love and they're your solid ones, or even one, but it's always good to have a backup plan and have other partners sort of waiting in the wings, other rescue groups you can reach out to. Because what happens if one time that organization is full and can't take dogs or cats, or if you're on the receiving end, what happens if your shelter that you're relying on every month to send transport for some reason can't get to you that month? So it's really great for somebody to be proactive and to have partnerships going constantly to be able to grow the program. They also are representing our organization. I think we forget about this. A lot of times we think about a foster coordinator, a rescue coordinator. They might be working more internally at your organization, but this position is so crucial because they are interacting with people all across the country at some points. And for some organizations, this person, they're not going to know your executive director. They're not going to know your shelter manager. They're going to know your organization by your transport coordinator. So they always have to be representing your organization with the utmost respect. They got to be professional. As you guys know, there's a lot of personalities out there in the rescue world. We're not always the easiest to work with. So they've got to be really savvy in terms of working with a lot of different strong personalities out there. And number one, you're going to get tired of me saying this tonight, but they've got to be a strong communicator. And then probably our most important one, but dedicated to life-saving. And that ties into all of the points above of if they're not dedicated to your mission, if they don't see the light at the end of the tunnel of why you're doing transport, why you're up at 5 a.m, why you're constantly working through roadblocks, they're going to be quick to sort of give up and say this job is a little too hard. So you definitely want them to be dedicated to life-saving. So we've got a little poll for you. We're really interested in seeing kind of where you're coming from. So I'm interested in your organizations, if you could take a few seconds and just answering this question, but do you have a transport coordinator at your shelter? It's yes, you do, no, and then we have an option of sort of. So take a few seconds if you don't mind just voting on that, and we'll see what the results are. Okay, so we're seeing the results coming in. It looks like about 50% of you actually have a transport coordinator. About 22% of you said no, and then 28% of you said sort of. So, okay, that's really interesting. Thank you guys for responding. It's always great for us to see how things are going at home. All right, so we talked about transport coordinator. Now this is the tough one. So we hear this a lot. How do I even start? How do I find rescue partners? And this is from both ends. So this is if you are in a shelter where you feel you're getting, your live release rate is going up and increasing every day. Your programs are getting stronger by the month, but you are finding yourself with a unique situation, and maybe it's in the winter more than the summer. The holiday adoptions are coming in, you're seeing your adoption traffic kind of spike, but you're seeing empty kennels and you're like, well, we could sit here half full, or even I've heard of shelters, it's sort of a miracle, but with shelters that actually don't have any dogs in them at some points of the year. But how we have the ability to help, how do we reach out and find new partners? And on the other end, how do I find partners? I'm drowning in dogs and cats every day. How do I find partners? I wish I could give you the sort of magic elixir and a secret kind of weapon that you have, but there is no replacement for hard work and really just relentless networking. We've tried a few tactics, and when I was just starting out, tried a few different ways of doing this. I will say, and I've worked with shelters that have done this. You pick 100, say, shelters. You're casting that wide net. You have no contact with them whatsoever. You're sending out a cold call email. Again, it's sort of a canned response. It's the same email that you're sending to 100 other partners, but you're not getting a great reply. So we've seen that time and time again, where people are just sort of firing out these canned emails, but they're not getting a great response back. I have found in my experience and when working with other shelters, some of the most promising relationships have come from a mutual connection. So think about, even though if you don't feel like, maybe you're new to animal welfare, you don't feel overly connected, or you're new in your position, that's okay. It's all about being scrappy and being very good at networking. So think about contacts that are people that go across the country and that they're well connected. So I've listed a few organizations here. We'll get into Duber in a little bit as a tool for you all, but these are these are people that are going all over the country. They've got a finger on the pulse of what's going on nationally. They're talking to shelters that have space that can bring in more dogs and cats, and then also shelters that really need that partner to work with. So a few are listed. You also can think outside the box. So your shelter software, who's your admin person, whether it be Shelter Love, they're traveling across the country. They're interfacing with tons of shelters. It seems a little strange to be asking them for leads, but that's the goal here, is asking for leads. Who could they connect you to? Microchip companies, your admin person there, Dogs Playing for Life, Facebook groups that you might be part of. Volunteer connections. If you have a volunteer that's coming from, maybe they lived in the Northeast or the Pacific Northwest, and they now live in Texas or Florida, wherever you are at, they're great. I volunteered at this shelter. A lot of times they can bridge that connection for you, or they just are well connected on social media and you might not just have the time for that. So also using rescue forums and message boards. So really, we see it time and time again is people are complaining that they don't have partners, they don't know where to start, but they do have some leads that they can reach out to. It's just a matter of doing that work. So I recommend making a contact list, starting a spreadsheet, super easy, Google Docs, Google spreadsheet, and start making a list of sort of your wish list. Organizations I've heard of that I want to reach out to, put a date on there where you've reached out to them, and then what are the notes? Did they say no response, or did they say yes? Or did they say contact us next month? So these are all good ways to kind of track your outreach, but it's just as simple as a spreadsheet, but the key is following up with every lead possible. One of the things that there's a few resources out there that can be really helpful, but Dubert, if you guys aren't signed up on Dubert, definitely recommend it. It's just simple, dubert.com. And what it is, it's basically connecting shelters to each other all over the country, and it's creating a network of transport volunteers. So they go through a system, they get approved to be a volunteer, and then you can set a basic itinerary or a travel plan, and then that'll blast an email out to all the volunteers in that area. Dubert does a great way of automatically doing a itinerary or sort of a transport plan for you. You can sign up yourself as an individual as well as an organization. If you haven't done that yet, I definitely would. It's a free resource. I've also, Rachel at Dubert, it's been gracious enough to offer her email. She's been wonderful. They have a really good sort of frequently asked question page, FAQ there. But if you kind of get stuck after watching some of their videos, definitely reach out to her and ask your question. She's wonderful. They have a partner map, so a wonderful resource to be able to find organizations close to you, far from you, that you want to partner with, whether it be bringing in dogs and cats or sending out to. Conferences are huge. Going to apprenticeships through Maddie's Fund. We've got a ton of those. That's a great networking. We've seen a lot of good rescue partnerships come out of these opportunities. Again, those online forums, but essentially you just always want to kind of keep an eye out. What's going on? You're on this webinar, that's a great start. Podcasts that are out there, and just sort of keeping a finger on the pulse of what's happening across our country. The other thing I have to say, if you are a source shelter and you're reaching out and doing outreach and trying to find other partners to send dogs and cats to, don't get discouraged with a no. I always think of it, nine times out of 10, I'm gonna get a no. But try not to stop there, because it could be that they're full right now, but that for them to reach out to you come the holidays or in 2 months from now. So then I'm gonna make a little note on my spreadsheet and say, okay, note to self, in 2 months, I wanna follow back up with this partner. The other thing I've had a lot of luck with, and organizations have too, is if I've reached out to somebody and they say, no, we're full, I ask, do they have any partner organizations or any in the area that they could recommend me to? Then now all of a sudden they're CCing me with that organization. I've got now that mutual contact. So it's not just a cold call. I've got a connection in with them, and then I can start my conversation. So don't just stop at no, but see if they can help connect you to. So I think we kind of always are working in silos and we feel that we're isolated, but we really need to just sort of bridge this partnership and help each other, even if our organization can't take in dogs at that moment. Here's an example. Again, this is a lot of text, so I'll let you kind of read through it. But this is an example. Again, this is just sort of my style of emailing. You all might have a different style, so feel free to, obviously tweak this to fit your needs. It might not fit completely what you agree with. But this would be, so not the initial contact to an organization you want to transport to, but this is just sort of an email outreach to somebody like, I looked at Shelter Love or with Dubert, and I want to reach out and see if there's a connection that they could, maybe Petco Foundation, maybe somebody that they could connect me to. So I'm introducing myself. You'll notice this is a personalized email. I'm not doing a canned email out to someone where they feel it's generic and they're kind of just getting spam in their inbox. I'm being really gracious, I'm being nice about it, but I'm also spelling out my needs. So summer's been tough. Our kennels are overflowing. We're looking for a safe outlet for our dogs. Our intakes are outpacing our adoptions. That's the key. That's why we're looking to transport. We need help. And then we're asking, it's a direct ask. We're hoping to connect with a few rescue partners or receiving partners that may be willing to rescue some dogs from us. And then asking them straight up, are there any organizations they would recommend? This isn't an autopilot. I'm absolutely having to go to these organizations or I have to partner with them. It's just getting leads. And then we let them know we're building our transport protocols. They're built on best practices. I'm not saying, will you do all the work for me? I'm saying, I'll do the work. Could you just do the connection? And then, of course, being gracious and thanking them for their time. Again, personalizing that response. So this is just hopefully like a helpful, again, this is just a template. You don't need to adopt it perfectly to your organization. But this is something that's been really helpful to just start that conversation. But then the key is these leads that they give you. If they give you organizations, the key is following up with them. I know some of this gets buried in our inbox because we're kind of trying to keep our head above water with day-to-day things and putting out fires every day. But this is something that's so crucial to growing a transport program or even starting it in the first place. I remember my very first transport was 10 dogs to Portland. Never knew this organization before. All I had was a phone number and a name, but an entire transport program grew from somebody that could take Portland, Oregon, 10 dogs. That was it. It grew from 10 dogs to 1,400 in a year, just building a partnership. But it all starts with reaching out to these leads that you're getting. We have one more poll for you, second one that we've got. So we're going to ask you, how are you transporting? This is what we're really curious to hear. And how are you receiving transports in? So if you're transporting out, how are you doing it? If you're receiving them, how are you bringing them in? So is it through your organization? You've got your vehicle or a partner's vehicle is coming up to you. Are you working with a third-party organization, so a flight partner or a paid transporter? Are you already using Dubert or a network of volunteers that are transporting? Or are you participating in the hub spoke model, which is one central transport destination, and then animals are being dispersed to different organizations once they arrive? So again, we'll give you a few seconds to just put your answers in there, and we'll be interested to see your results. Okay, this is really interesting. All right, so first, we've got 64% of you are doing your own transport or another partner organization's vehicle is coming to you. Really interesting to see. Second is 24% of you are working with a third-party organization, whether it be Dog is My Co-Pilot, Wings of Rescue, I'm guessing, or a paid transporter. Dubert is a network of volunteers, about 10% of you, and then 2% are in the hub spoke model. Okay, so that's really interesting for us to see. I see most of you then are having direct contact in that sense with a rescue organization, so partner to partner. So this will hopefully be very helpful for you. Great, thank you guys. Alrighty, so what the receiving organization needs. This is kind of my favorite thing to talk about, and something that we work through at our apprenticeships is having source shelters and receiving shelters on other sides of the table, and just having an open conversation about what they need. So I've learned a lot through the last year or so of talking to other shelters and hearing kind of where our pain points are. These are things I wish I knew starting out. I think I would have been a stronger source partner if I knew kind of what the receiving organization needed. And we're going to go kind of back and forth on this. So first one, number one, and I've pulled a lot of organizations, talked to a lot of you guys, honesty and transparency is number one. It may be that you would have taken that dog with a broken leg, but you just wish you would have known that dog had a broken leg. So it wasn't a surprise off the transport. Also too, we're doing our best to be, a lot of times we're transporting because we have an overload of animals and dogs and cats, and it is hard. Like, attention to detail is very difficult. But when you're selecting dogs and cats for transport, when we're doing our health certificates, so important to just not think, oh, it's just about numbers and just move them out, but about really valuing that partnership. And that all starts with honesty. So an organization is probably not going to want to continue to partner with you if they're constantly kind of getting overloaded with surprises. And so that transparency is huge. Medical and otherwise. That also is for behavior issues as well. So if a dog, all of a sudden, you have a partner and they've asked for dogs that are super social with other dogs, and all of a sudden you're seeing that the dog is becoming more and more selective with you, then that would be something that you would just want to disclose with your partner. Again, surprises not really welcome. On the flip side of that, it doesn't mean that that organization would have not taken your dog, but if you're not being transparent, you just never know. So you want to put the whole kind of list out there and have that conversation. Organized partner, this is a huge one. Having kennels that are labeled and getting that paperwork under control. So that's absolutely huge. That's sort of my pet peeve. I've received transports before with just a stack of paperwork. They're all over the place. And then the kennels are not labeled. So I just get a group of dogs and I don't know who's who, and all the paperwork is kind of everywhere. That's my biggest one. That's my biggest pet peeve. That adds hours of work for a receiving organization. It's very, very difficult. So that's one of the things that if you can change anything, being organized is so, so important. It's amazing how much time will be added on when you're disorganized. Reliable and clear communication. That's huge in terms of being able to have a steady point of contact, that one point of contact that's always there for you, that you can get responses from. Nothing worse than when a transport's on the road and you're trying to get updates and you can't get in touch with that source shelter. So very important. And also consistency. So if you have decided December 1st, we're going to do a transport, make sure that you hold on to that date. So of course things are going to happen, but that's where your communication's coming in. But being consistent, you want a partner that's receiving, 30, 40 dogs at a time. That's it. That's a huge job to take on. And so if you say they're going to get there at 12 p.m., but they don't arrive until 1 in the morning, that can put a huge burden on your partner. And all of these things, they don't seem like a big deal, but they do add up, and it's going to really put a strain on your partnership. Sorry about that. The bar was showing up in that. Apologies. Yeah. Okay, so what the source shelter needs. So we're kind of looking at both perspectives here. Reliable and clear communication. So that's huge. That was before. We're going to talk a lot about communication. One of the things I'm hearing from a lot of shelters in the South, they're reaching out to partners. They need help, but they're not even getting a response back of a no. So I think just common courtesy, even if your organization can't help, just giving a response back to that organization versus just ghosting them and not saying anything at all. It's very respectful. It's a great use of everyone's time. I think it's just really going to make a huge difference. So that clear communication, and making sure that at least if you're full, you're telling them so. Feedback, this is huge. So being on the ground, being a source shelter, you can't predict everything that's going to happen. Maybe the dog that did great in foster care, you had no issues with other dogs, gets up and is a little bit stressed and is acting a little bit weird with dogs, maybe not super social like you said they were, maybe a dog is breaking with kennel cough. And so instead of just ghosting, or what I call divorcing that partner without talking, make sure that you're reaching out and you're like, this is what we saw. Or the transport, the dog seemed kind of stressed. What can we do next time to make things better? Or we saw these two dogs, they actually broke with ringworm up here, and that's really difficult for us. So these are things that happen despite our best efforts. This is real talk. Despite our best efforts of health certificates and doing medical work, but giving that feedback, just having that discussion, how can that source shelter improve? Instead of just ghosting them and saying, we're never going to work with that partner again, that's really difficult. And ultimately, it is decreasing our life-saving efforts when we're just cutting out a rescue that desperately needs us. How can we work on that partnership? Consistency. So we're going to talk a little bit about that too. But again, that one point of contact is really helpful. Fast responses. So a lot of time we're working with short timelines down south. So, if you just have an email of candidates and you're like, well, I'll get to it next week, consistency is key, and just having quick responses and being there for them. This is the biggest one I hear is that, we want to transport, but we've got our small dogs covered, our friendly, fluffy, purebred adult dogs flying out the door with our local adopters. But we have got a bunch of these really wonderful sort of mixed breed, kind of medium, large dogs. They're bomb-proof. They're good with dogs. They're even good with cats. They're good with people. But because of how they look and because of their size, I can't get them on transport. So all my partners just want dogs that have a safe outlet in my community. That's the biggest thing I hear. So we're going to spend a little bit of time for that. So variety is huge. So these are the things that the source shelter needs. I think we'll be better partners if we can understand what our partner needs and kind of what our partner's struggles are, and stop thinking of it as just sort of my problem, but sort of open it up a little bit. So we'll talk about that a lot as variety on transport. So we're seeing sort of the traditional model was just kind of moving small dogs, and that's generalizing, a group, but moving our smaller dogs, moving dogs that are easier to place, puppies and things. But we're seeing groups more and more sort of on the advanced end. They've been doing transport for a while, and they're looking on not just appearance, but they're prioritizing candidates based on sociability. I think that's huge. When I'm working with a partner from the source shelter perspective, when I'm working with a partner, I'm going to pick sociability. Like when they say I can take based on personality, how they are with dogs, how they are with people. And that's more important to me than maybe their size or their age or even what they look like. That to me is a pretty good, strong partnership. We can save more lives. We can have a bigger impact that way. And the reality is adopters, so if you are receiving dogs in or cats in, all adopters are different. Every single adopter, so you get 50 adopters coming through your door every week. All 50 of those are not all going to want puppies. They're not going to want all small dogs. So we need to cater to these things. We got people that want senior dogs. We have big dog people out there, people that want black dogs, or even blocky-headed dogs. So we have adopters wanting a variety, so we have to cater to their needs as well. So there's a benefit on both ends. And I think we're really, as your program gets stronger and stronger, even as you just start a program, I think a really healthy way to look at it is transport is not as just a solution for one organization, but it's a solution to a multifaceted problem. So it's solving a problem, not just in your community of low adoption numbers, and we don't have enough dogs to adopt out to people, but also we're life-saving. We're having a bigger impact in our partner shelters. So think of it as we're solving the problem in both communities. All right, so communicating with new partners. This is a big one. We have this grumpy cat saying, get on the phone. We are a generation, this is an age of texting and emails. We kind of cringe when our phone rings. But I would say the one, and I'm usually a lover of email and text, but I would say the one exception to that is when you are starting out with a new partner. So setting up that phone call, having an actual personal conversation with them. So you've never transported with them before. There's a lot that you've got to figure out. In retrospect, I wish I had more phone calls when starting out with a transport versus dealing with issues after the dogs have gotten there, because you don't even have, you don't know your partner very well. You don't know what their struggles are. We will make sure that you guys get this conversation guide, but we've built a conversation guide for you all. It's just sort of a rough guide of questions to ask and things that you want to hit. But here are the kind of the big high points, and they're very specific, but really what you're looking for is the goal of the conversation is really to get to know your partner. So you're introducing yourself, you're talking about your organization, how you're set up. Maybe you're talking about intake numbers, why you're looking to transport in the first place. On the flip side, you're going to talk about what your adopters are looking for and why you're transporting in the first place, what your strengths are. So if you've got a pet-loving, active community that you can move dogs that are pretty active, that love to go, they're hiking buddies, they're outdoorsy. If that's your strength, then you're going to be talking about that. Talk about capacity as well. Bigger questions to ask are, do your missions align? So from a source shelter's perspective, we want to know what the euthanasia policy is before we send 30 dogs up north. Looking at medical, what happens if our dog or cat comes down with parvo, or our cat comes down with ringworm, or our dog comes down with parvo? Is that going to be a death sentence for them? So really having those real questions. Behavior, what would be a behavior euthanasia at their partner shelter? So hopefully if you are in the position of transporting in, you are at no kill, truly no kill, and you're working with more advanced behavior issues and working with modification, and you've got, you know, things like parvo wort sit up, and you're able to handle ringworm, you're well versed in these things. On the flip side, so from the receiving end, you want to see what their intake process is, making sure that dogs and cats are vaccinated on intake. What's their flow? Are they sitting in a shelter for the whole time before they come on transport? How long from when they're tagged are they actually leaving on transport? Do they go to foster? So learning about what that care and that intake and the medical piece looks like is so important, knowing on what to expect when the dogs and cats arrive. On the other end too, if you're a source shelter, looking at what length of stay is or adoption process. We don't want to, if an organization is struggling with a high length of stay for a particular population of animals, we don't want to necessarily add to that population. And understanding also what the adoption process is. That also, side note, very helpful to kind of keep your fosters engaged in your source communities, because your fosters, I think the fear of the unknown is kind of scary. So if they know what the receiving partner's adoption process looks like, and they know that dogs and cats, they might stay 1 week or 3 days before they've got a line of people wanting to adopt them, that's really good for your community and for your shelter and your organization to know. But really the goal of that first call, and yes, I say call, it can be even Zoom, that's even better, like Zoom, what we're using right now, that face-to-face or FaceTime, but that clear understanding of each other's organization setup, and then that way you can get a better understanding, you can be a more effective partner, but it's also that personal connection. All right, so a little bit about dog and cat criteria. So as I was saying before, I call it the pitching process. So we're sharing photos, videos, bios. I think the thing with this, and I've seen sort of a wide spectrum in terms of what rescue organizations are requiring of each other. I've seen it from as extensive from like, we need 6 videos of all these different situations, and it takes me about an hour to do just one dog, pitching one dog for a transport, versus a really efficient system. Maybe it's like a quick feedback, you know, quick email form or a Google form. So working on what works best for both of your organizations. So not only is the receiving organization getting what they need, but it's not too cumbersome for the source shelter, and it's an actual process that's doable for everybody. Couple ideas out there, ways that you can share candidates that could be possibilities for transport, using Maddie's Pet Forum, using a Facebook, maybe a closed group where you guys are talking back and forth. I've worked with shelters that they put their partners all in one Facebook group. It's closed. They're going to then post photos and post personality like bios and info and videos onto that closed group, and rescue partners can pull from there. Google Docs are really great. So if you know your partner really well and where their strengths are, having a form so you're not going back. I love this bulleted list in a first email. So you're not going back and forth with like 45 different questions back and forth to each other, or 45 different emails. It's just, here are the 4 things that we need to know about this dog that you're pitching to me. And then, hey, could you attach a video or a picture? There's also Trello. It's a free resource if you guys aren't familiar. It's sort of like an online Pinterest. I kind of see it as Pinterest, but it's an online bulletin board. Again, free to use. You can kind of organize your boards. So you could say, you know, medium-sized dogs needing placement, and then rescue partners can click on your Trello board. It's actually how at APA we are pleading for fosters through Trello. Then building trust. This is sort of an end goal to get to. I love when we get to this point because I think it's the most efficient. So say you've got a couple transports under your belt, or a few transports under your belt, and the transport coordinator, because your relationship is so strong on both ends, think of your transport coordinators, they're almost an extension of your shelter at the other organization. So you would even trust them to go into a municipal shelter and choose dogs and cats for you, for your own organization. So you'll say, hey, I've got 15 spots open. This is a breakdown. Go ahead and start filling the list. And then they know you trust them. You've built, with all the conversations you've had, you've built a partnership where they will reach out to you if a dog or cat doesn't fit into that criteria. But otherwise, they don't have to run every single candidate by you, or you have a running roster. If any of you guys have those partnerships, I'm very jealous. I love it. I think it's great. Keep building on that, but just know that's the end goal. And then really for both ends, the transport coordinator, again, that role is crucial. They've got to balance not only their space, but looking at their population, what variety do they already have, and then also balancing that with who needs to be saved. So big compromise that kind of has to, both partners need to be working hand in hand together. All right, so we've got one more poll for you, and it's coming up. All right, so we're getting into the roadblocks here. I want to hear some of your challenges. So what's your biggest roadblock when it comes to growing your transport program? And you can choose any that apply to this. So is it lack of resources? Is it funds, staff, not having your own vehicle? Is it the ability to send a variety of dogs? So partners that will only accept more than just puppies and small dogs, lack of consistent or inconsistent partnerships. And then you just don't have enough open kennels. So you need to speed up your adoption flow to open more kennel space. You can take in more dogs through transport or cats. And then community pushback. Your community doesn't agree with transport. So if you can check any that apply, and we'll give you a few seconds to do that. Okay, so we've got some results here, kind of across the board. I think you guys are agreeing on a lot of them, but lack of resources, funds, staff, 45% of you. Ability to send a variety of dogs and cats is 48%, and then 58%, so this is the number one reason, is lack or inconsistent partnerships. So lack of partnerships or inconsistent. Community pushback is our least amount. That's good to see, 3%. And then need to speed up our adoption flow. We don't have enough kennel space to take in more, so 18%. But lack or inconsistent partnerships is number one. Interesting. All right, thanks guys. All right, so MOUs, rescue agreements, if you don't have them, definitely recommend them. So after you've got that conversation, after you've sort of chosen your criteria, you've talked to your organization that you're sending to or that you're receiving from, you kind of know what criteria are based on, really good to have a good set of rescue agreements in place. Obviously you don't, if you're receiving dogs or cats you don't want to be taking during their stray hold time. So that seems like common sense, but it's really good to have on paper. Ownership transfer. So when does that happen? Typically, you know, who's responsible for medical and when? Typically it's when the animals arrive to their destination. That's when the ownership officially transfers, and everyone while they're in transit, it's sort of an agreement that the source shelter is then responsible. What are your vaccination, your medical procedures, what your heartworm test requirements are, getting that all down in paper, and then disclosing illness, so having an agreement on that. The biggest one, of course, we talked about a little, is euthanasia policy. So what happens if a dog or cat that you send comes down with a medical issue or a behavior issue? Best practice always to be in contact with your source shelter and alerting them. Not a huge fan of sending dogs back to the source shelter, but at least having an open conversation of figuring out, kind of together, figuring out solutions of how we can save this life versus just euthanizing and that partner not knowing and not being part of it, as well as transport costs. So we'll get into a little bit, kind of a hot button topic right now is who pays for what. When we're looking at, luckily this year, best practices, best transport practices has been come out, and we can make sure to send those to you. If you guys don't have those, they've been published from Association for Animal Welfare and Advancement. And so there's a lot of different ways. I would encourage you guys to go in and read some of the ways that shelters have worked with source partners and receiving partners. I've seen it where source shelters are going to cover the vet care, where the receiving shelter is covering transport costs, or the receiving shelter is assisting with maybe vaccinations or funds for spay-neuter, kicking that back into the source community that might be underfunded. In-kind donations, so supplies are going back. And then even, I love this one, it's creative, but meeting transport halfway. So the group from, you know, down south isn't having to transport all the way across the country, but they're meeting halfway to kind of cut costs and cut that effort. Something that is, I think, an ongoing conversation and sort of an ongoing struggle here, but it's spelled out in best practices, and I like that it's published now. But basically, if receiving organizations, if they're not investing in the source shelters communities other than accepting the animals, so not paying a fee, not providing any sort of monetary or in-kind support, they must consider ways to provide additional support to that source shelter. Ways that have been spelled out in best practices are accepting more challenging to place animals with behavior or medical needs, or accepting breeds that are more difficult to place. So I know this kind of might be spinning our minds a little bit, but I think this is our end goal of what to work towards. So not just putting kind of the brunt on the effort of funding and getting our source shelter, getting those dogs and cats out of, you know, the southern states or where they're overpopulated, putting all of that obligation on the source shelter, but having sort of a split mutual agreement on that. And it's a joint effort. So again, that's branching out. It's not just one organization's problem to fix, but it's a group, it's a national effort, partnership effort. All right, so we're winding down here. You've heard me say it a lot, but communication is absolutely key. Put it on the head here in terms of successful partnerships. So it seems so simple, so we'll break it down a little bit. But there's a lot of things that are missed. But communication before, we talked a lot about that, having that personal call, continuing to get on the phone, having calls, and then of course during transport, making sure you've got somebody that's on call on both organizations. Nothing's worse. I've been in that situation where you've got a group of dogs traveling across the US or going, across many states, but you're having trouble getting in contact with that receiving organization. And then I've seen it vice versa. So that constant flow of communication is key. And then after transport, I love after transport. I think this is the one area that we're not doing enough of, but routine feedback calls. How did it go? How'd the dogs look? How are the cats? Did they settle in okay? How can we improve? And this is both partners. So if you're receiving and you're like, you know what? Dogs looked a little rough, coming off transport, looked really stressed. Maybe we can work on this going forward. Or the sizes were a little bit different than what we thought. I mean, simple things like that, or to more serious stuff. Like we had 5 dogs out of 10 that had medical issues that we didn't know about. How can we fix this going forward? So having that post-feedback call, I've seen it time and time again where organizations are just getting frustrated and the frustrations compounding on each other. And then the partnership just crashes and burns. But a lot of that can be prevented if you just have that feedback call. Even if you haven't done a transport, I highly recommend scheduling regular meetings, monthly check-ins with your partners. So you might not have been with them, you might not have transported up to them for 3-4 months, but having a monthly check-in is going to maintain that partnership. We heard it today. It's sort of like how you are cultivating your donor base. It's almost the same as you would think of it, the same as your transport partners. And then figuring out beforehand, how are you going to communicate space crisis? So yes, we might do a monthly transport together, but if space gets really bad, how am I going to communicate that? Or on the flip side, when the organization that's bringing in, how will they communicate back to that source shelter? Hey, you know what? We had a huge adoption event. We've got space. So making sure that you guys are both in line and that expectation is there, that you're there for each other. And there, again, constant communication. We've seen some incredible partnerships come out of this where you can almost call each other up and it's like calling your coworker essentially, and they might be across the country. Then consistency. So my favorite thing is when you can schedule regular transports so both partners can plan on them. You can plan on getting 20 dogs every month from your partner or 10 dogs every month from your partner. And then more importantly, the source shelter knows that they've got that live outcome option that's consistently there. So that would be sort of a really good goal to work towards. I think as a rule of thumb, put yourself in their shoes. So I always like this motto: listen, learn, and act. We are constantly under pressure. We've got a million things going on. We're wearing many hats. It's so hard to not just get on a phone or an email and just think one-sided about the whole picture of like, I've got 80 dogs down here, but just take a second, take a breath and listen to your partner and find out what their struggles are, what they need, and then learn from them. And I think you're going to be a better partner when you can truly understand that and see where you can kind of find that middle ground and then make a difference. So if you're hearing complaints, if you're hearing issues, don't just sort of throw your hands up in the air and say, oh, they don't know what they're talking about, but really act and be like, you know what? Transport isn't perfect. This isn't going well, but how can we be better? Gratitude goes a long way. I can't say this enough. Saying thank you a million times. An organization can send, I love when source shelters are sending thank you cards. I've seen shelters where multiple people are signing it from that organization. That is literally, as a receiving organization, brought me to tears. The thank you card might be covered in poop and looks a little rough, but it's so sweet to have that thank you and to know, that other partner is so appreciative of all the hard work. Even though you might have never visited or met each other. On the flip side, it's so great on the source shelter to get an adoption story, to get updates. We're able to get more fosters that way when we see the success stories, when we know what's happening with our dogs and cats that we've sent, when we're celebrating successes together versus just sort of hiding those stories. And this is one thing I have to say, if you're ever in town, if you ever are taking a trip somewhere, go out of your way, try to visit each other. It is so eye-opening. I think it really will change the whole nature of your partnership when you see a day in the life of that shelter, and you really get to meet them in person and see their dogs and see their setup. It's just so incredible. And last but not least, stay positive. You're gonna hear no's. You're gonna have, maybe somebody that doesn't respond back to you. You're gonna have partnerships and transports that don't go as organized as you would like, but the whole program is riding on your resiliency and the ability to just keep getting up the next day and just figuring out, even though it seems impossible, figuring out ways that you can make a difference and you can make it better. And remember that as much work as transport is, it is such a powerful life-saving tool in our toolbox. I think of it as sort of the next step in life-saving. It's our next piece. So we can do so much, save so many lives across the country. And quite frankly, it is desperately, desperately needed for partners to do more transport. So working as hard as you can at that. So I'll just close. I want to make sure that you guys have my email. You can reach out to me anytime. I'm happy to have a call with you, talk through email, talk through your individual problems. We also do site visits. So I would love to even visit your shelter, work through some transport program problems and troubleshoot solutions together if that's needed. So don't hesitate to reach out. And just so our minds aren't spinning, we'll end on a happy story. This is Honey. She came from City of San Antonio Animal Care Services. Came in, you can see she looks a little rough. She's got Demodex mange. She had a lot of hair loss. She recently had puppies. They were all weaned when she came in. All her puppies got adopted and left her behind. And she was on the euthanasia list and had no other option, no foster, no rescue, no adoption had stepped up for her. We transported her to Oregon. Through San Antonio Pets Alive. She went to a partner in Oregon. Here she is on the Oregon coast. It's just so amazing to see that transformation and looking in her eyes and knowing that she had no other option in Texas. She needed transport to save her life. You can see her loving life on the beach, thriving, super proud, a formerly stressed out dog with no other option now, just super proud and happy to be in Oregon. So transport can save lives. So happy to help you guys, and we'll stick around for a few more questions if you have them. So thank you.
Thank you, Claire. We'll be taking questions through our Q&A and have a couple that have come in already. Claire, what do you do? What are some ideas to increase resources for transport programs?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. And I wish I had more time, and I think this is a good jumping off point to, we need more transport webinars. But one of the things, we didn't really touch on costs, but one of the things that's been very helpful is doing a lot of fundraisers. And we see the most luck when if you are, say, just transporting dogs, for instance, when you are sharing the individual dog stories and you're having people fund an individual dog. So if it costs you calculate all your costs and it costs about $100, then maybe you're asking people to sponsor about $100 of transport or $10. And once we get to 100, then that dog's transport is covered and they have a safe outlet. So really, instead of saying fund our transport program, but show them the faces of the lives that they could save. We've seen through Facebook in particular, a huge uptick in donations and support that way. Also grants, so looking at transport grants around you, I'm happy to share some resources that we've got in terms of how to find grants and write program grants. But I would caution you not to sort of go for it as like, we need to fund a transport coordinator. That's not it's not a really attractive thing to fund a staff position, but fund an entire program. And you can show your success and all the work you've done. We've got X amount of temporary fosters. We've got 3 partners lined up. We have got volunteers, so they're seeing the success of the programs already in the works. And then all they need is the funds to really secure that. And then, securing, I think, as inexpensive as you can make transport is the better. So tends to be more inexpensive if you can bring it in-house versus paying a third party or using volunteers like through Dubert. If you can bring it in-house in some type of transport vehicle sponsorship, so if you can get that sponsored, go ahead and put their name all over it, you know, you get that vehicle donated to you, that's going to be much more cost effective than having to pay 125 per dog or per cat to transport out. I've done both models. So it's just kind of getting scrappy and looking at sort of resources around you, but I'm happy to share some of those kind of ways to find grants and secure those resources after this. Good question though.
Thank you. Our next question, how do you mend inconsistent partnerships? What are some suggestions that you have for that?
Yeah, for sure. So for that, and I've definitely been on the receiving end of that, of just being frustrated and wishing we could mend the partnership. I think in that case, that individual reach out is huge. Instead of having like multi people sort of, you never know who your point of contact is. It is nice to have that one person really do the reach out and try to establish a connection. And then getting on the phone. I know it's painful, but asking for that phone call, asking for a conversation. And then I think honesty is key, and just spelling it out there. Don't beat around the bush and just say, hey, listen, I know this has been rough in the past, or I know that we haven't been transporting much together, and it seems like each transport, there's a lot of hiccups. I want to do the best job I can to make your life easier, to save more lives. What can we do? And then really listen to what they're saying, take notes, and then brainstorm on your end. How can we make this better? So if they feel that you're making an effort to make things better and to improve the relationship, I think you're going to have a much better chance at having a lasting partnership. But there's that individual contact, listening to each other, having regular communication. I think there's no better substitution than that. And just being thankful, putting each other in each other's shoes, and just, yeah, taking a minute to reflect on that, I think is huge.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, this has been very informative, Claire. Thank you so much. If there are other questions that people want answers to, or if there are topics that you want us to cover in one of our upcoming webinars, please feel free to reach out to us and let us know what you're itching to learn. Thank you so much, and I hope you all have a wonderful night.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Claire.